Welcome to the Look Good, Move Well podcast.
Okay, I think we've done this before, but Satya, what's a supplement you've taken in the past or currently where you're like, damn, that actually, I know that works. That feels like it really makes a difference.
Yeah, well, I mean, the one that we're going to talk about today, obviously.
Well, that not obviously, but
yeah. I guess because that's like the most recent one that I've been experimenting with. But
yeah.
I'm a big creatine fan, and I never expected that to happen in my life.
There you go. Do you want to just give a personal anecdote about why? First off, why did you not think that was something that would ever happen, or why was that not on your radar?
Well, like many women, I fell into the myth of creatine as being just for dudes who wanted to bulk up, basically. I thought it was a dude thing.
Yeah.
I was mistaken. Yeah.
Well, I think they hit the marketing hard on the dude thing for sure. Yeah.
But I mean, I can tell what I've noticed with taking creatine.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Which is that I decided to just do 5 milligrams a day. And is it milligrams or micrograms in the creatine?
Grams. Just a whole gram.
A regular old gram.
5,000 milligrams.
5,000 milligrams.
Or
Thank
5
you.
grams.
Yeah. Obviously, I'm super brushed up on the science of all of this.
I just do the scoop, damn it.
The scoop, exactly. I take a scoop a day, and then right on time, like 28 to 30 days in, I started noticing in my training that, I can like access more strength, get more reps out of whatever set I was working on, which was really exciting, especially for upper body work, which is a big struggle for me. And then body composition changes have been good to go.
Awesome.
Feeling lean, feeling muscular, and just loving it.
And there may be some placebo effect in there.
Yeah. Well, one more other thing I'll say for women is that I'm 45 and I was having some perimenopausal symptoms. And this is pure anecdotal, but I do think there actually is research around this. But those symptoms have majorly eased since I started taking creatine. I don't know if that's all related or not, but that's definitely been my experience.
We need to get that fact check going on here. I'd love to dig into that, but I don't have access to the research to say yay or nay. But that's an interesting anecdote. And hey, if you're feeling better in that regard, like props for you for having a little improvement. But whether it's creatine or not, that's a win.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, well, it's funny. We're talking so much about creatine these days. I think because we made a piece of short form content that we posted to Instagram originally, got a lot of engagement there, but then we posted it to YouTube Shorts, and it's like just taken off. It's over 1 million views now, with a comment section that's quite robust. And you got what I guess I've been struck by is the amount of continued misunderstanding about what that supplement is and what it can do.
Yeah.
And then also just like the people that are, continue to sort of spew these like myths as truths. Yeah. And then it just makes people fearful of the supplement. And then also just like, what is this thing really, how much could you really expect out of it? I mean, so I think it's still a topic and that deserves a lot of attention. I almost was like, why are we even talking about creatine? Like, it's like everyone knows.
Everyone knows that's,
yeah. But I'm like, apparently they don't know that. And not that like we need to go on like a creatine mission to like get everybody in the world, like you should wake up every day and forget everything else. Just make sure you get your creatine in. But it's it's a valuable subject and supplement to highlight. And I think, more and more research will come out over time, investigating its impacts and effects on other systems of the body, not just like building muscle.
Yeah, it has mental benefits that have been proven, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And again, it's like, when you've got 1,000 research studies that say it does this for muscle mass and strength and blah, blah, blah. And like they've been repeated over and over again. And they've been like we can own those as sort of more or less truths. And then, sort of these other areas of the body and these other impacts that it might have, more needs to come out to like, not just, oh, we found this we have this new finding, but it's like we've been able to replicate this finding, 100 times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I have noticed about creatine is that it has been very well studied.
Yeah, it is the most well studied of all the sports supplements that are out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe just I'll do my best to sort of give a little bit of like a general understanding of what the supplement in this molecule does. Because I think it's still maybe a myth to some people, or there's a misunderstanding, or it's sort of like a
vague concept of like,
black box of like, well, what is this thing do? Is this a steroid?
Right.
Creatine, and its most common delivery as a supplement is creatine monohydrate. Creatine basically is this molecule that when it's in your muscle cells, it gets bonded to by a phosphate. Okay, and creatine phosphate is how it's like living in there naturally in your muscle cells. And everybody knows that ATP, most people have heard that ATP is the energy currency of the body, right? ATP, the P on there stands for phosphate. The T stands for tri. So you got like 3 phosphates on this ATP molecule. When you use ATP for energy, one of those phosphates, one of the 3, it falls off. You break that bond. The energy in that bond is what supplies energy to contractile tissue, muscle. So you need ATP. You need a lot of ATP to get muscles to start to contract. Once ATP dumps its phosphate and breaks that bond, it's now ADP, diphosphate. We got to get another P back on there for it to work again. It's kind of like once ATP goes to ADP, it's non-functional. We got to reload it. You reload it through a variety of different methods. Glycolysis is like when you burn sugars for energy. Like, hey, I'm burning a lot of sugars. Okay, that means you're turning sugars, and basically through a process in the body called glycolysis, you're reloading ATP with the phosphate. Some people are like, how about burning fat? Oxidation, oxidative phosphorylation. That's the term where you take other substrates and you burn through with oxygen more ATP. You're adding those phosphates back onto the DP. All right. So this is what burning sugars and burning fat, that's what you are doing. You're actually making more ATP, and then it gets used, and guess what? You got to burn some more energy to make more ATP. There's one other pathway that is worth mentioning, which is the immediate pathway, because burning sugars takes a little bit of time. Burning fat takes more time. But what's immediate is when the creatine phosphate in your muscle just sort of delivers its phosphate that's there right to ATP. Okay, or ADP. It happens instantaneously. So you're doing your set of dips or bench press or squats, and you're starting to feel like you're crapping out on the last couple reps because ATP is being depleted, and you're having to burn a lot of this sugar really fast to get more ATP. But if you have a big storage depot of creatine phosphate in your muscle, boom, you can deliver that to the ATP production fast. You can make ATP really fast with creatine. It's just all there. So if you have a little bit of creatine phosphate in your muscle, you only get to immediately make a little bit. If you have a lot of creatine phosphate in your muscle, you get to make a lot more quickly. And so what creatine supplementation does is it enhances that pool of creatine phosphate in your muscle. That's all it does. It just makes what's already there, because this is a natural thing that is in your body. You can get creatine from eating meat, red meat, when you eat other animal, because we have our own amount in our muscles. All animals have it in their muscles. So if you eat a mussel, guess what? You're supplementing creatine, right? If you eat a steak, you just got some creatine. However, to maximize, to hit that physiological max of how much creatine phosphate you can get into your muscle, they have found that 5 grams a day, 3 to 5 grams a day of creatine supplementation gets everybody there. And then guess what? If you take 10 grams a day, it's not really doing anything for you, unless you're unless you're the mountain,
a giant,
who has more muscle and needs. And even in that case, it is weight dependent somewhat, but that 3 to 5 gram range works. If you take 5, but you needed less, don't worry. It's just gonna be a little more expensive. You're just gonna pee it out, or it's gonna get excreted. So that's all it's doing. And what can that extra depot of creatine phosphate actually, yield in the way of performance? It's not going to take you from a 100-pound bench press to a 200-pound bench press.
Right.
It is going to allow you to get a little bit more out of each set when you're training.
Yep.
And that means that over time, that effort compounds into something that's meaningful. The other thing that creatine phosphate does is anytime, you have more stuff that you're storing in your muscle tissue, you get a little bit, you have to have a little bit of water to balance that out. So if your muscle has more salt in it, then there's going to be more water in there too, in order to keep the balance of water to solutes at a place that the body can function well at. So when people take creatine supplements, they get a little bit more creatine in their muscle. They get a little bit more water in their muscles. Now, people are like, oh, there's water retention. It's like, people get upset when they retain water in their, underneath their skin, and kind of and they're like, because when there's water underneath your skin, it looks, there's no, it's hard to discern whether that's fat or water. It just looks puffy. You kind of look a little fat, or a little fatter. But if there's water in your muscles, then your muscles just look bigger, not by some massive amount, but
just a little bit,
your muscles are
tight.
Your muscles are a little more pumped up.
That's right.
And who doesn't love a pump? When you go and get a pump at the gym and people are like, I love the pump. That's because there's more blood in your muscles, which is essentially more there's more blood flowing to the muscles, which is essentially more water flowing to the muscles, which makes them look a little bit more swollen, which makes people feel like, oh, that feels good. So when you get water retention as a result of creatine supplementation, just think of it like you're a little bit more pumped up all the time. Like you have a perma pump, right? And that's a win. That's a good thing. So that is not the same as I went on a binge this weekend. I ate a bunch of salty foods, and I woke up and there was this layer of water underneath my skin, and I just felt like you can't take your ring, your ring is stuck. Oh, my ring is stuck because my fingers are puffy. Well, guess what? That's not muscle that's inflating on that's just interstitial, in between the cells, just fluid, and you got that all over. You got this it's when people cut out an allergen from their diet and they suddenly shrink. They're like, oh my God, I just shrunk. It's because you were eating that thing that was making you so allergic. You were constantly inflamed and holding water in these weird places that don't feel good. So that's kind of the overview of creatine.
Okay.
And then what are we hearing out there? I pulled up a couple posts. I pulled up the comment section from this, and I also pulled up a post that's about creatine myths. That's the most common ones that we hear. Creatine causes kidney damage, which we should get into. Creatine causes hair loss. It causes dehydration and cramping. And you need to have a loading phase. And then there's people talking about it makes it well, actually, we'll get to those comments in a minute. But what are there other ones that you've heard that feel need addressing?
The only one that came to mind in addition to those was about cycling. Do you have to cycle it on and off? And,
Sure.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So let's start with the cycling on and off and loading phase.
Yeah.
I hear people say, oh yeah, I just take my creatine and my post-workout shake.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm like, well, do you work out every day? They're like, no, I don't.
Yeah.
I'm like, so you're taking creatine 3 days a week? They're like, yeah, or 4, maybe 5. Okay. So the what's happening here is that we are trying to saturate our muscles with creatine. We want to get to max saturation, because when it's max full saturated, that's when we can get the most benefit from it. Okay. That happens when you take 5 grams of creatine every day. Because the moment you stop, then your body is going to start working back to its homeostatic level, which is lower. And that's going to depend on what your diet looks like and what your body just naturally can produce. So if we want to keep that at its height, at the max loaded, in the muscle tissue, then we have to do it every day. It's an everyday supplement.
Yeah.
It's like you take your, antidepressant every day. You don't just like take it when you're having a bad day. You take it every day because you want to keep those neurotransmitters and what's, the brain chemistry at a level state. It's like I take my blood pressure medication every day, not just when I'm like, oh yeah, my blood pressure's a little high today, I'm going to pop this. That's not how those things work. It's an everyday supplement.
Yeah, and I think that's a misconception because people think of creatine as a workout supplement, and so they think they should only take it around a workout before or after, something like that.
Yeah, so that's important to understand. Now, the loading phase concept is something that it's not like a myth. You don't need a loading phase, but if you take 5 grams of creatine starting today, then after about 2 to 3 weeks, closer to 3, your muscles will reach full saturation. If for the first week you take 10 grams a day, you can accelerate that saturation. So if you're somebody who's never taken creatine before, you hear this podcast, you're like, I want to get into creatine, and I'm bummed that I've been late to this party, then go and do a loading phase of 7 to 10 days where you take double that amount, 10 grams a day. And then after that, you go down to 5, and that's the dose you take forever, going forward. Mm-hmm. And it'll get you there a week ahead of time. You start seeing the gains a week ahead of time, which, hey, if that's
nothing wrong with
go
that.
for it. Yeah. Is it essential? It's not essential.
Yeah.
Then the cycling on and off, what could be the value of that? I can understand somebody saying, I just want to cut all additional supplements out for a period of time. Once a year for 1 month, I just cut everything out, and then I bring them back one at a time. Mm-hmm. Okay. You can lump creatine in there. Do you need to cycle off of it? Is it unhealthy to have it every day ongoing forever? The answer is no. You do not need to cycle off of it, and cycling off and back on is not going to improve or change the efficacy of this supplement.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably it with cycling.
Great.
And I think the biggest one of all of what we just said was most people are equating this with a sports supplement, and they're like, I got to have it after my workout or around my workout, but those are the only days that I take it. Mm-hmm. It's not something you take on a workout day. And the term here is that there is no acute effect of creatine.
It's not like your pre-workout.
It's not like taking caffeine. It's not like when you drink caffeine, boom, you're ready to work out.
Right.
Take it before your workout. Don't take it after, because after you miss the opportunity. Mm-hmm. With creatine, people say, should I take it before or after? I'm like, it doesn't matter. And to be honest, I wouldn't even put it anywhere near your workout, because people make the mistake of then thinking it's something I only take with workouts. And so I don't think it should be in your pre-workout. I don't think it should be in your after-workout shake. I think it should be in the thing when you wake up in the morning and you go and the same thing you drink every morning, put it in that. Mm-hmm. Or put it in right before bed I take it, create a habit around it that is connected to something that you do every day, not something that you do 5 days a week or 4 days a week.
Yep.
Yeah. The I think the next one is probably the kidney damage one that I hear a lot. And this is certainly by all means, like, it's something to be you should be concerned about the health of your internal organs. So if you hear something that's like, hey, I've heard that damages this thing, like, tread
into
lightly.
that.
Yeah, look into it for sure.
Yeah.
Here's what happens and why people believe this, and it keeps getting perpetuated. We have a marker. We have markers in our blood that are basically like, this is a proxy for whether our kidneys are healthy or not. So when you go get a blood test, you'll actually, depending on who you get the blood test through and what who orders it, you'll see like a section on your printout that's like, about renal function, which is your kidneys. And it's like, these are the 3 markers that, or 2 or 3 markers that will show whether I have my kidneys are working well. If those are elevated, and creatinine is one of them. If creatinine is elevated in your blood, then that's a signal to the healthcare professional to be like, hey, looks like your kidneys aren't excreting this well. Something might be going on with your kidneys. We need to investigate further. This is what we would, if a kidney specialist were to look at a blood panel and see, hey, I see that the creatinine is elevated, they would do further testing to figure out what's going on. What they would not say is, your creatinine is elevated, your kidneys are damaged. It's a marker for what could likely be, maybe, quite possibly be something going on with your kidneys, and we got to investigate that. Now, creatinine sounds pretty darn similar to creatine, right? There is absolutely like the fundamental molecular similarity going on there, and that when you take supplemental creatine, it elevates your creatinine. So you have a supplement and it elevates this number. Oh my gosh, that number's elevated. We should go check it out. Not, oh my God, that number's elevated, my kidneys are damaged.
Right.
That's the problem that most people are running into, is that they're supplementing with creatine. Creatinine, therefore, is elevated. And they're making the false assumption that means their kidneys are getting damaged. And the creatinine is simply elevated because you're supplementing with it and you're taking this exogenous creatine outside the body, a supplement, in. It'd be like saying, if you go and get your blood drawn and you're looking at all these markers, you're typically asked to do it fasted. So you do it fasted because you don't want the meal that you just had an hour ago to impact what is going on in your bloodstream. So what this myth would be equivalent to is, you go and have eggs and bacon for breakfast. An hour and a half later, you go get your blood drawn. And your cholesterol and your triglycerides on the blood panel are sky high. And you're like, oh my gosh, like I have heart disease. It's like, well, no, because that's reflective of just your breakfast. Like, you just, the cholesterol and the fat from the eggs and the bacon just got absorbed into your body, and your liver did a little processing, but now it's in your bloodstream because it's going to all the different places of your body where you're going to store it. It's just en route to getting stored. This is not your normal baseline amount. This is not physiological normal for you. This is just what's getting spread around. And so that's like with creatine supplementation. It's like, oh, I have high creatinine. Yeah, because you're supplementing with creatine,
right?
Not because your kidneys are damaged. Now, with that said, if you have a history of kidney, disease, or like not poorly functioning kidneys, then certainly consult your healthcare professional about supplementing with creatine. The other thing is that you could go off creatine for, a week prior to your blood work, or you get blood work and you're concerned about it, stop creatine for a week, retest, and if your numbers become normal again, then guess what? Your kidneys were fine. It was just the supplement. So that's kind of how to navigate that and why people are concerned about it, and what why there's kind of like that misunderstanding of like, oh, this number's elevated on my blood panel, therefore I must be, my kidneys must be dying.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, what else? What next?
Hair loss.
Hair loss. I tried to break this down for you and Shauna recently, but basically, and I don't know this perfectly. I did hear there's actually Derek More Plates More Dates on YouTube does a better breakdown of this. I'm just going to paraphrase essentially what he said. But there was a study that was done, I don't know how many years ago, on a group of, I think it was like Australian rugby players that all were put on creatine for however long. And I guess there were two groups, right? One of the group that was on creatine and the group that wasn't, they had an increase in a hormone marker in their body, whereas the other one didn't. It just so happens that marker also tends to be elevated in men with male pattern baldness. So kind of similar to what we just talked about, but it's like I have an increase in this thing over here in the creatine group. And it was, I don't remember how significant it was and if it was like 100% but there was some noticeable like, hey, few of these athletes had this increase. And then, if you sample another population, and you take a bunch of, balding men, a certain number of them have the same elevated thing. And so somebody was like, whoa, creatine causes hair loss. Mm-hmm. But the study and the individuals in the study didn't lose their hair. And there's been no study to show that causation or even direct correlation. They've just had this correlation of the supplementing elevated this compound in the body, this molecule in the body, in some individuals, the same molecule that happens to be elevated in some people over here. And that's it. It's as loose as that. And it hasn't been replicated and proven in any other way. Now, that headline's out there. And you got so many people around the world taking creatine. And who's generally taking creatine? Dudes that lift weights in the gym, getting after it. Some of whom are taking all kinds of PEDs, and some are just men that get bald, and right? There's just a lot of dudes out there taking it. So of all the dudes that are out there taking creatine, you got bald people, or you got people who are losing their hair. They hear this and they're like, that's why I'm losing my hair. Obviously, I started taking creatine at around age 33 and I started losing my hair. And it's just like, is that why? Or was it just, it's correlation versus causation. It's this classic mistake that people make, especially when the population of people taking this thing called creatine monohydrate happens to include, it's predominantly in the male portion of the population where most balding is happening, or at least, so it's just flimsy, and it's just not true. But if you're out there and you're balding and you are really scared of enhancing anything that might potentially cause you to bald more, then you can certainly skip out on creatine and up your chances of retaining your hair. But by all means, I'm not suggesting that is a foolproof plan to avoid balding. And I don't know enough about, the science around retaining hair and regrowing hair, and but that somebody like Derek More Plates More Dates, who I think has a pretty significant receding hairline. He talks a lot about hair loss in men. He's very into the science on it. He is very adamant that like creatine's not the problem.
Yeah.
And so that's, again, coming from somebody who's a little bit more plugged into that industry.
Yeah. Well, and this is also anecdotal, but you know, I've had alopecia since I was 17, and I order my hair on the internet. Like, I literally do not have a lot of hair, but my creatine usage has had zero impact on, you know, I would notice if something was causing me to lose more, for sure.
Well, that's a great anecdote to add to the conversation. That's perfect.
If you're curious on the women's side.
If you are curious on the women's side.
No impact study of one person who also has a history of hair loss.
All right, so I think we want to dig into some of the funny stuff that's popping up on the YouTube comments. So I think we've hit most of the common myths. I mean, one, I started out that particular episode talking about how inexpensive creatine is, which I think rubbed some people the wrong way because, like, expensive is a relative term to everybody. Sure. Creatine, you know, in the way that I've been, I can source it a number of ways. Creatine monohydrate is all you need to get. Okay. Yeah. Creatine monohydrate is, there's no better version that's out there. Supplement companies might say, hey, this creatine, you know, HCl or diester, blah, blah, blah. Like, you got to get this kind. It's the best way. It's like creatine monohydrate is the one that's been studied. It's the one that is used in all the research, and it gets you to that saturation point that we already talked about. You don't need to go any more fancy than that. So, creatine monohydrate, you can get it a lot of places. If I was on a budget, I would buy it in bulk. And so in America, there's a few, you know, companies that can do that. Bulksupplements.com is kind of the leading one. And you can buy a big bag of it, where if you break down the price of what does it cost for 5 grams a day when you buy a big bag, it's about 20 to 25 cents per serving. Now, it means you have to buy a big bag. You got to buy probably 5 pounds of this stuff. So that might be out of pocket a lot, but it's just a smaller daily amount. Yep. Now, 25 cents a day plus whatever else you're taking for supplements, it starts to add up. So you always have to think, what are the supplements that are going to be the most efficacious, are going to help me with my particular need and fit my budget? Mm-hmm. If you have an unlimited budget, I say take all the supplements so long as they're safe and so long as they are actually impacting you positively. You know, if you have a low budget, like, then I do think creatine kind of fits on even that low budget, you know, list for most people because of its tried and true efficacy. The next one that came up was, you know, it is causes gastric distress. So without creatine, I shit a healthy, normal amount. With creatine, I cry on the toilet, shitting fire 80 times a day. So here's how this actually plays out in real life. Okay. We talked about creatine and the water retention thing. Now, if you take 10 grams of creatine, like a loading dose, mm-hmm. When you have creatine in your digestive tract before it's absorbed, what happens to, you know, wherever there are solutes like creatine or salt or, you know, other, water goes. So if you have creatine in your digestive system while you're taking a bigger dose, a lot of water is going to come into your digestive system to basically help process it. If you get a lot of water in your digestive system, that's what laxatives can do. Okay, it's not a laxative. It's not like taking Metamucil or, you know, Miralax or something else. But it draws some water into the digestive system for a short, brief time. At that moment, maybe that causes you to have to get to the toilet. And that's real. So dial back your dose a little bit, right? And a way to combat that is, if it's really a problem, which it's not for the vast majority of people, but if it is, then guess what? You're trying to get 5 grams a day. So have 2.5 in the morning and 2.5 at night, and you won't get as much of that rush of water into your colon or your small intestine when you take your supplement. Okay. but again, it's overkill for most people to even concern themselves with that. It doesn't give you more lean mass. It makes you hold more water intramuscularly. We already talked about that. You're right. Like, you're not actually, the creatine's not building new muscle fibers.
Right.
It's just there to help your performance, and your performance helps you build more muscle fibers. Plus, you got the little water in there, which is like the perma pump, which we talked about. Okay. Now, this is good. Creatine has an extremely minor effect for most people. It is essentially an energy source for your muscles. Again, we talked about that. It is not anabolic or a performance-enhancing drug. It does not increase the lean muscle mass. It doesn't reduce your fat or anything like that. So again, I think this is like a very valid comment. Everything that they've said is true.
Yeah.
And you're right. Apart from anabolic androgenic steroids or something like erythropoietin EPO, like these drugs that are used on the freaking top sports to get people to perform better, outside of those, like, we're talking supplements that you can buy over the counter. None of them are going to do, they're not going to be 20% improvement type supplements.
Yeah.
We're talking 1 to 5% improvements depending on the person you are. And so do you want to take advantage of that? Go for it. If you don't, if you're like, oh, that's waste of my time, then don't. But what I find is that and don't assume that creatine supplementation is going to take the place of hard work, good diet, like all the other stuff.
Yeah.
But if you're listening to this, like, you probably know that. And it's like, do you want to get a little bit better? Sure, I do. I really want to get a little bit better. So you go for it, right? Okay. Anyway, I don't know if there's any other funny ones. Let me just see if there's any other. Creatine potentiates hair loss. No. Is it a safe product? Yes. Yeah. This person says, substitute pre-workout with coffee. Substitute protein shake with a steak. Yeah. And if you want to get creatine, you could eat 3 pounds of steak a day and you could probably get about the same amount. It's like, you pick and choose your battles here, and that makes sense.
Yep.
So which creatine is the best? Again, I'm not about saying there's one is the best over another. I think when you buy creatine, the only, if you get creatine monohydrate, why is this company's better than that one? The only thing that would make one company better than the other is whether what you have in the bottle that you bought from them is 100% creatine monohydrate, or if it's 50% creatine monohydrate and 50% some other white powder that they just mixed in there that is not creatine to make it cheaper for them to produce. So creatine monohydrate is the same molecule anywhere on earth, right? You just want to make sure it's pure. Whatever you're getting is pure. The way you ensure that is you buy from reputable retailers that have third-party or independent testing. So like the company is Bulk Nutrition. I think Bulk Supplements. I already mentioned that, right? I'm not like, we're not sponsored by them. It's not a bulk supplement company thing, but Bulk Supplements is a company that hires another company to come in. They actually, they hire a third party to come in and test all their stuff and be like, hey, we're not in charge of testing our own stuff. They obviously do, but then they bring somebody else in to test it to make sure that what they're saying is true. If you have a company like that, you're pretty safe.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it on creatine.
Right.
I hope you learned something today. If you have any more questions, drop them in our DMs and we'll tell you all about it. And if you're still on the fence, then give it a 30-day try. See what it does for you. All right. Peace.